Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
You know, right now we're still living in a country where sometimes folks are a little too cynical, and we're still just a little bit too divided as a country, and there's still a certain level of meanness there that I don't think is useful. And there's an element of fear that guides how we live in this country that I don't think is healthy. Because the problem with fear is that it clouds our judgment. You know, no one ever makes good decisions in the face of fear. We often make rash decisions. And fear cuts us off from one another. You know, it can cut us off within our own families, in our own communities, and definitely it can cut us off from the rest of the world. And I don't want my kids to grow up like that. I don't want that for them. And if I don't want it for my girls, I don't want it for any other child. See, I want my girls to be much more free than I ever was or ever will be. I want them to be able to think broadly about who they want to be, define that in any way possible, and then reach for it. I want them to be able to travel the world without fear and really be citizens of this globe. I want so much for them to have a better country, one that's guided by simple things like compassion and open-mindedness and faith and empathy. And it's funny that we live in a culture that when you talk about stuff like that, people say you're being naive. You know, it's like we've given up on those qualities. You know, we've gotten beaten down and we believe that that's impossible. And I don't think that's true, and I think we owe it to our children to fight for something better. And what Barack says is that our greatest challenge as a nation is not that we have a deficit of resources, because we are one of the richest nations in the land. The resources are there. And it's not that we have a deficit of policies or plans, because we've got some of the greatest minds who know what we need to do. If we take public education, we know what good schools look like. We see them all over the country. We know what it takes to make them work. The problem is that they're not in good schools aren't available for every child in every community. So it's not that we don't know what to do. We haven't made the priority to make sure that all kids have access to that kind of quality public education, so we know the answers. Barack says that our greatest challenge as a nation is that we are suffering from a deficit of empathy. And that's where you get back to that hope thing that people sort of roll their eyes about. But I feel fundamentally that we have to look deep into our souls and be reminded of some basic stuff. That we are our brothers and sisters keepers, that we have a mutual obligation to one another. Barack says that we haven't been challenged like that in a long time. And we cannot measure our strength as a nation by the strongest of us, that we have to measure it by the least of these. That's the sign of a great nation. We've lost sight of that. He says we've also lost the ability to see ourselves in one another. Because see, when I see my child and yours, it is easier for me to make the sacrifices. If I don't think that my existence is any different than yours, that my pains and hurts and worries, that they're all the same, then it's easier for us to make these compromises as a nation. But if we fear one another, if we assume that the differences define us rather than focus on the things that unite us, I mean, are we really ready for change? Are we ready to shed our skepticism and cynicism and pick up that mantle of possibility and hope? Are we ready to be led by what unites us rather than what divides us? Are we ready to set aside that fear? Because sometimes we're comfortable with the world as it is, and we're afraid of change.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.